Hi, Ray Moran here today to talk again about the Valuation 20 event with Ben Elder. Ben has been chair of the Tangible Asset Board of the International Valuation Standards Council, International Director of Valuation for the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and someone I really enjoy sharing travel stories with around the world. Ben, welcome. It's great to have you here. Would love to get your perspective upon the four main themes of the Valuation 20 and how much they overlap with the themes of the G20. Can you comment a bit about that?
Yeah, sure, Ray, and great to be here, and thanks for your time, and likewise, always enjoy the conversations. I think it's really important that we look at those four main themes that are kicking the V20 off. And the themes which I think are challenging to all valuers everywhere, in whether they're dealing with tangible assets or plant machinery, business valuations, or even financial instruments now. And they revolve around the transparency and the availability of data, which impacts on the quality of the decisions which are made. It looks at some of the livelihood issues. And that's one of the areas I'm particularly interested in this this area of restoration of livelihoods, particularly where compulsory acquisition is involved in many parts of the world. And of course, we can't talk about any valuations at the moment without touching on the ESG issues and the climate change and the new financial reporting regulations, which are very much on the way in as we speak. And then finally strengthening the profession and the provision of qualified valuers around the globe, because in many developing nations that's a real stumbling block to good decision making, because the professionals just aren't trained at this point in time. And I think we've got a role to help in all of those areas, right?
Yeah, I'm amazed, Ben, at how much those themes overlap with what we do every day as valuers. Perhaps just going back over those four again on data transparency and availability, just the changes I've seen alone in terms of technology, innovation, and data that crosses borders. Yeah, it's amazing how this topic is just everywhere in our careers, isn't it?
Very much so. And again, I think seeing my grey hair, I've been about for a little bit of time. And I think when I started doing valuations, information was king, whereas I think now knowledge is king. And really the important part is that transition from information into knowledge and how that actually happens. But it's easy to forget that many countries don't have the same access to information as perhaps we are privileged to in more developed nations, and that process is still to be undertaken. And I think part of this V20 work will be to highlight the processes and the better provision of information, or the better provision of information can make to better decisions. And if we get better decisions which underpin the G20, then V20 will have fulfilled its mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And back in the day, my hair used to be red, and I still have a Hewlett-Packard 12C calculator that I'll look at for amusement from time to time. But on that second theme of livelihood, land use, and habitat, that's just a fascinating one, because you can get into international land measurement standards and some of the UN habitat issues that are out there, can't you?
Absolutely, and the UN goals, sustainability goals, and that whole area of land registration and areas, the vast areas of the world. If I recall correctly, last time I read, it was about 70% of the world is not registered. So there are vast tracts of unregistered land there. It doesn't mean to say anybody doesn't own it or occupy it or use it. It just means it's not formally registered in a system that perhaps we as Westerners would expect to see. And then trying to work out what the additional risk is, talking in valuation terms. But also that area means that the people who occupy those lands probably don't have access to the same financial systems that we do. Again, there's a great gender issue in some of those countries as well, particularly around female entrepreneurs and how they can access finance to develop some of the great businesses that they have the ideas for and want to develop. And some of this work in this area will liberate enormous amounts of some of the poorest people in the world. And I really think that's an important focus that the V20 should have in supporting G20 initiatives.
Oh, absolutely. And that third theme of ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, really touches everything we do within real property, plant machinery, and business valuation, particularly the need for consistent metrics and measurements that we can incorporate, as well as standards and transparency, don't they?
It certainly does, and then it overlaps back into the first theme of data and transparency, and here the ESG. I just wish that perhaps when we talk about ESG, people would put a full stop after the E and after the S and after the G, because they're all different measurements, and yet they tend to sort of get lumped into one thought process. And probably the most difficult one of those is the S, the social element, and actually that overlaps back into the livelihood element of theme 2 that we've just been discussing. So they are all interlinked, but that ESG agenda has moved remarkably over the last 24 months, and obviously the regulators are starting to require additional information in those under those headings, and the valuers are the people who can provide that. We are the eyes and the ears of most decision makers on projects, and therefore we've got a real part to play. And if we don't pick up the bat and run with it, then the entrepreneurs and the decision makers will go elsewhere. But valuers are really well placed, but it probably needs some additional training and upskilling to make sure that we can meet the real challenges which are in front of us.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think regarding the E, or environmental, well, we all understand the impact of green buildings and values, and within business valuations, how they may or may not affect an actual valuation. As a plant machinery valuer, I think of infrastructure and alternative energy projects, which are just a booming niche these days, and it's really one of interest to all of us. So it touches, again, everything that we do. But we'll have more fun talking about this in October.
Yeah.
And on the last one of my favorites is actually strengthening professional capacity, because it goes on to everything from standards to education to diversity worldwide, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there are many countries who don't fully recognize the power which is contained in a valuation or a valuer, and getting that process in place so that the valuations are trusted by all parties. And to do that, you've got to build in the professionalism, you've got to build in the independence of the valuer, and the objectivity of the valuer, so that they can demonstrate that they are maintaining and reporting in a consistent way, which builds that trust in the information which they are imparting. And that's a real challenge, and it's not we've not been completely successful everywhere in the world, and even in developed nations there are some challenges to those to those fields, and making sure that we can nurture and build on the talent of people who can become valuers. They might not be valuers at the moment. They may be engaged in other professions, and certainly some very bright academics involved in the process, particularly in some of the financial instruments valuations, that we can capture and bring those people into this really important valuation I nearly said family, but profession is probably a better word to use.
Sometimes it feels like a family, Ben, and I couldn't agree more about the need, particularly to bring younger people into our profession. Here in the U.S., where I work primarily, we have a large need to reach out and really bring in those people and demonstrate the opportunities of a career in valuation and what they can do, because it's a booming niche right now. But these are just wonderful topics, and I'm looking forward to further discussions at the actual V20 event. Ben, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and time with us. I hope you come back and we get a chance to talk more about this.
It's always a pleasure. And yes, anytime.